Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And when I was asked to speak, I was given a brief that they wanted me to inspire you. Hopefully I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to scare you. Because this thing called disruption is not going away. I've been here most of today, and I've attended some of the sessions. Some of you may have seen me on the panel before. And I think, apart from regulation, the one thing that's keeping you awake is, what do we do about this whole thing around disruption? So I want to give you a case as to why it's going to happen. I want to show you what you can do as an organisation. I want you to be able to go back after Brexit, after the hangover party on Friday and the weekend, next Monday morning. I want you to picture what you're going to be doing and who you're going to be talking to about what I've said this afternoon, if it makes sense. But I am really a digital disruptor. I've been disrupting for a number of years. I'm Australian. I've been in London for 10 years. I'm a dual citizen. I get to vote in the referendum tomorrow. Not wanting to disrupt anything there, but I really want to share with you how I've been able to disrupt even my own career in getting to you this afternoon. Because the only reason I'm on stage here this afternoon is because of one tweet. One tweet I sent on the 15th of January 2011. And that tweet simply said, "Arrive San Francisco." Now I have a global role, and roles before were very global, so I travel around the world a lot. And what I do when I land is I tweet where I am. It's very disruptive. Why would people want to know where I am? Because you never quite know what's going to happen next. And what happened next on the 15th of January 2011 was another Australian who I'd never met saw my tweet and said, "Let's catch up." So I caught up with Anthony down at Fisherman's Wharf. We had lunch. He introduced me to someone who was to become my boss, the funder of a company called Cred that looks at social media influence. And in fact, the last time I was in this building on stage was when I was CEO of Cred talking about social influence. And I was the CEO of Cred for a couple of years, and 18 months into that role, IBM came knocking. So I can honestly say that that one tweet got me a job at IBM. So that's a way to disrupt the market. But if I'm going to talk about digital disruption, I think it's only fair that you hear some of my digital credentials. You can then decide for yourself whether what I'm talking about makes sense, whether the advice I'm going to give you can apply to your role, your job, and your organisation. Anyone remember what this is? Now, depending on the audience, I get lots of nods and yeses, and if I'm in a millennial audience, they go, "What's that lump of plastic?" That is a Sinclair ZX80. It was my first computer in 1980. It had 1K of RAM, 4K of ROM, and a squidgy keyboard, and ran the programming language BASIC. And that's how I started my disruptive journey. I started playing with computers back in 1980. Now, a few months ago, my daughter Madeline and I, who's 10, we went to the Science Museum here in London, and we walked past a glass case. Behind that glass case was an Apple IIc and the Sinclair ZX80. And Madeline turned to me and she said, "Daddy, isn't that your computer you keep talking about all the time? Yeah, you must be really old if it's in a museum behind a glass case." So yes, I know that I've been playing with this for a while. Anyone recognise this noise? Yeah, pretty disruptive in its time. That's a 33.3 kilobit per second dial-up modem. And again, depending on my audience, someone says, "Is that a fax machine?" And then someone afterwards says, "What's a fax machine?" But really, that is how I started an online journey in 1983. I was dialing up things like this that are bulletin boards, and I would dial up. I would leave messages we now call email. I'd call up 4 or 5 hours later hoping that my friends had actually left me a message. Now, I knew that I was hooked on this online thing back in 1983 when my father had to get an extra phone line because I was always dialed up to this bulletin board internet thingy, and he had no idea how to get through. I've had a website since 1994, and there's a wonderful site called the Wayback Machine, archive.org, that allows you to go back and see what websites looked like ages ago. The earliest I can go back is the 18th of October 2000, and my website, my personal website, looked like this. Pretty ordinary. If it was live, there'd be flashing graphics, all the things you know not to do. But again, I was being a disruptor. And in fact, if you look up there, at the bottom it says @forum. I've been blogging since before we called it blogging. I had a section on my website where I would put my point of view across and I would ask people to respond before the blogging platforms existed. So I've been blogging for about 16 years. Now, the reason I do these things is I can then confidently talk to clients about what it's like to be on the internet from an early age, what it's like to blog, what it's like to interact in a social environment. And so I encourage you to also practice those sorts of things. But what is digital disruption? Why is it something we talk about so much? Why is it keeping some of us awake at night, and after my talk, all of you awake at night? It's because disruption occurs anytime a company uses digital tools or platforms to deliver better product experiences to customers in less time and for less money. And from all the panels I've participated in today, many of you are concerned because you have established businesses and these young upstarts are coming along and they're disrupting and they're doing things different ways, and it's hard to change when you're an established company. But why does disruption happen? And there are so many examples, and we'll use a number today. Disruption happens because, first of all, there are high profits. Now, your industry, you're doing very well. And when someone sees there's money to be made, other people will come in and try and disrupt that to do it a quicker way. New technologies come into play, and I'll talk about some of those this afternoon, that allow this disruption to happen at the click of a cell phone. And there are new client demands. I spoke in one of the panels this afternoon about the fact that if I'd asked you 20 years ago to carry around your mobile phone, you would have said, what are you on? Why do you want me to carry around a piece of plastic everywhere I go? After work, on the weekends? But now, I guarantee you, none of you would be without it, because we know that it actually makes our life a lot easier. And I shared with the group this morning that back in 1994, I bought my first mobile phone. It was a Nokia N1000, an analog phone, and it cost me $1,000. All my friends thought I was crazy. Why have you bought this piece of plastic? And then slowly but surely over the years, more and more of my friends got a mobile phone, all of my business associates got it, and now we all carry one. So that's where expectations change. And now we can actually check our email on our phones, whereas before we had to do the whole dial-up that I had to do back in 1983. Now, there was a fantastic paper written by Clay Christensen back in the HBR in 1995, and he said that the challenge is that managers have got to be aware of ignoring new technologies that don't initially meet the needs of the mainstream customers, or translating that, incumbents have a blind spot towards innovation. Not a criticism. It's really hard to see the wood for the trees when you're head down in an existing business, to have the time to look at what else is happening. And so some of the tips and techniques I'll give you today are how you can actually step back from the day-to-day and actually look at what you should be doing next. The first reason why disruption happens is that consumers are ready for this. We're always on. We can relate to that because all of us have a mobile phone with us, all of us checking our emails, tweeting, doing all those sorts of things. It's now the stage where it is expected that you can do things while you're out of the office. Now, before I was involved with social and IBM, I did a lot of work in mobile. And I remember in 2009 talking about the promise and everyone would have one, and we were hoping that would happen. It certainly has happened. People are doing their research using digital and using social. And I even, when I go and meet with clients, I'm very fortunate in my job at IBM, I get to meet some very senior people. And when I meet them, I say to them, what was the first thing you did when you saw my name on the meeting request? And I said, I put your name into Google or LinkedIn. So even about human beings, people are doing research about other people before they meet them. And before they look at any of your products, they will have gone online. And this is a whole other talk about how social technologies and social networks can be used as tools to determine whether one product is better than the other. So even though I know a lot of you spend a lot of money on traditional marketing, consider how that is being disrupted. I've worked in advertising for years. I don't read ads because I know how it works. I want to find out from someone that actually uses the product, that is having an unbiased review about why they think this product is better than the other. And finally, consumers are also transacting via digital. We're all doing this. This is not new. But this is where disruption happens because it's shifting the conversation to a whole new paradigm. Now, conditions favour innovation, and we talked on the panel this afternoon about the fact that regulators love innovation because it promotes transparency. And if you look at websites like Kickstarter, it's a crowdfunding site, they hold no cash. They are an enabler. They enable people to matchmake with investments. And so they get around regulation because they don't actually have to be regulated. And Uber and others are examples of that that we'll talk about in a few moments. Also, the technology finally works. You've got 4G services, you've got Wi-Fi that's almost everywhere, you've got the ability to connect to people on the go. And things like cloud computing have massively scaled up businesses. When I worked at Cred, we had a relationship with Twitter where we received every single tweet in real time. 10 to 20,000 tweets a second, and we stored them all on servers. We had 250 billion tweets when I left the company. The only way we could do that was with technologies like Hadoop and cloud computing that allowed us to ingest this massive unstructured data into a cloud platform. And so while mainframes have been the stay of your industry for a while, you can now literally spin up an instance in seconds and provide services and scale that very, very quickly. That's only fairly recently been available, and that's why this disruption is happening. And APIs and ecosystems. This is where you can actually share or tap into other people's platforms. At IBM, we have a platform called Bluemix. We've basically put a bunch of our products and services on a platform that is free to test and then a commercial relationship to use. And so the power of things like Watson, which I'll talk about in a moment, can be distributed to lots and lots of people. And so one thing you should think about for your Monday morning staff meeting when you're going to go, what did this Australian guy say, is how can you tap into the ecosystem? How can you use other people's tools? How can you rent time on someone else's server to do your job in an even better way? We've had all these revolutions. We've had the Industrial Revolution where, of course, steam power, electricity, mass market came in and you were able to produce things very, very affordably. Cars is one example. We had the digital revolution with the IBM 360 here as an example, where things got a lot faster. And I remember as probably a 15-year-old sending off punch cards to my local computing centre and getting back the Snoopy calendar. So, you know, we had that power back then. The internet revolution is something that I grew up with, and my ZX80 and my time on those bulletin boards is my lifetime experience where I've known no differently. But now we have the network revolution. And this is again where things will absolutely disrupt. And I want you to stretch your thinking because you may not think you have a network. But each of your firms, each of your companies, each of your clients has their own network. And if you tap into that, you'll definitely have the network effect and it'll be very, very powerful. I just started reading this book called The Network Imperative. It's just been published and it's fantastic at looking at these different business models. You'll see on the bottom left there's a short link, social.bz/TNI, and you can actually go and buy that on Amazon. And I'm about halfway through, but I just can't put it down because it really explains how beyond digital, these network effects will really drive innovation. Because successful digital businesses leverage their network effect. IBM has a network, LinkedIn has a network, Linedata has a network, and you're all part of that. Imagine being able to connect all that together and actually leverage the power of that. That's another thing that will disrupt businesses. Who here uses WhatsApp? A few people? Well, in fact, a lot of people. Now, this is an interesting business. This is one service that was purchased by Facebook. Anyone have a guess how many WhatsApp are sent every day? Someone shout it out. I'll tell you the answer. 64 billion. Let's compare that by summing every single mobile phone operator in the world and adding up all the SMS traffic for the same day. 20 billion. That is disruption on a massive scale. This is one website and one app that's completely free that has completely decimated SMS revenue. And having worked at mobile phone operators in Australia like Telstra and Optus, SMS revenue was the lifeblood. It was money for jam. It cost pennies to send messages and they were charging upwards of 20 or 30 cents a time. So this is one example of disruption on a massive scale. And this is the reason why Facebook paid $18 billion to acquire them. So let's look at some of these well-known disruptors, and rather than just give them lip service, I want to give you a bit more behind each one of them. So what's the world's largest taxi company that owns no vehicles? You must get this one right. Uber. Now, Uber wasn't an overnight success. Uber started in 2009. Two of the founders basically were at Le Web in Paris and were musing about how they might want to get around because taxis in San Francisco were really hard to get. So they started essentially a limo for hire service. So back then, the unmet need they thought was there was people wanting to hire limos. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't always need a limo. And only fairly recently was the Uber X concept brought around, where you can be an average person with a vehicle less than 10 years old and the Uber app, and you can drive me around. And I use Uber pretty much everywhere now. I try and use Uber in every city I visit to, one, test the experience. And if I'm in San Francisco and I'm in my hotel room and I want an Uber, and I go downstairs, the Uber is there before I've got out of the lift. In Australia, it took 5 or 6 minutes. In Croatia, it was 4 minutes. And I ask all the Uber drivers, why are they an Uber driver? And most of them I've met do it for a bit of part-time cash. It's not a career for them, but they can say, I've got a day off, I'm going to go and become an Uber driver. So they can, like that, become a taxi provider. The world's largest accommodation provider owns no real estate. That, of course, is Airbnb. Anyone know how they got their name? They started off as air, bed and breakfast. These guys thought of having air mattresses that they would actually rent out. And I talked to someone who's at Airbnb fairly senior last week in San Francisco, and he said at the time they were looking at the addressable market of how many airbeds are there in the United States. And then they thought, why don't we actually extend that to having guests actually rent out their homes? But again, Airbnb wasn't an overnight success. I've heard from the founders as well saying they use Visa funding. That was the Visa card, putting it all on the Visa card and hoping that they wouldn't clear too quickly. So again, these are established businesses now, but they actually took a while to get going. World's largest media producer owns no movie theatres. That, of course, is Netflix. Now, the interesting thing about Netflix is when Kevin Spacey approached them with his idea for House of Cards, he said it's going to cost $100 million to produce the first series. And Netflix went, yeah, okay. Because they had the data. They had the data about what sort of people like what sort of genre of movies, what sort of people like Kevin Spacey films, where they watch them, how long they watch them for, if they recommend them to friends. And the equation was they needed 565,000 new subscribers to break even. They signed up 17 million. That is a massive, massive disruption. And now Netflix produce their own content. And I was reading the BBC's chart the other day, and they had a lovely graphic saying, this is what $100 million buys you on the BBC. And there are a bunch of programs, and this was the one show that would be bought for $100 million, which is House of Cards. But it's increased revenue, it's increased sign-up, it has fostered a whole different line of programming from someone who owns the content. Now, of course, Netflix was the precursor of Blockbuster, and I read that a few years ago, Netflix was offered to Blockbuster for $50 million, and they said no. What happened next? They got massively disrupted. I could say the same thing about HMV and Jessops and all sorts of companies that haven't done so well. And in that book I've been reading, there's an interesting graph here that actually shows the difference between these network companies like Uber and Airbnb and the traditional rivals. Let's just compare the first couple. Uber's valued at 60 to 70 billion, no cars and more than 1 million drivers. Hertz, 7 billion market cap and 350,000 cars. That's a huge inventory to look at. Airbnb, $24 billion valuation, 1.5 million homes. Starwood, lots and lots of property. In fact, with Uber, I saw a stat today, there are 23,000 Uber cars, there are 23,000 taxis in London, and soon there'll be 48,000 Uber drivers in London. And in New York, it's even worse. There are 63,000 Uber drivers for 14,000 yellow cabs. This is just disruption on a massive scale, and it's because of all the things I talked about before. The market was right, there was a high barrier to entry. Those of you from London know that if you want to be a London cab driver, you have to sit for a test called the Knowledge. The Knowledge takes 3 years to learn, going through every single street, becoming a human GPS. That is a huge barrier to entry. What have Uber said? Plug in an app. It's going to happen to you too. Do not let the Uber of finance disrupt you next week. Whole industries are being disrupted, and there's some research here from Deloitte in Australia. It's actually 4 years old now, but it still is very, very relevant, and it's also relevant here in the UK. They looked at what they call short fuse big bang, where in the bottom left will there be a very short time to have a massive disruption. And if you look on the top left, actually, short fuse big bang, you're here. Finance, I'm here. Professional services. These are industries that are going to be massively disrupted in a very short space of time. So if you're not preparing for this now, I'd look for another job in one of these other industries that maybe isn't going to be impacted as much. So what are the effects of disruption? If we agree that we're going to be disrupted, what do I have to prepare for? What do I have to know to actually best prepare that? Now, Forrester has said that actually management fees will go down because there'll be more choice, there'll be more transparency, there'll be more automation, and so actually the revenue available to you will drop. So rather than be disrupted, you need to start disrupting. We talked on stage before about there's a bank in one part of the world where they wanted to replace their core banking platform, and they were going to ask the board for $350 million. The digital part of the bank did the same thing without being allowed to touch the core banking network for $7 million. So they disrupted themselves. And if I was the board, I know where I want to spend my money. I want to spend lots of $7 millions to actually make that even more perfect. Apparently also active investment management will be harder to sell because we talked before about robo-advice, and I'm going to talk a bit more about cognitive in a moment, but there will be less of an ability to provide that high level of service if there is a tranche of the market that is being serviced automatically. A great quote I read in one of these Forrester reports, if money can be managed this cheaply, am I getting my money's worth from my financial advisor? I don't want you to have that discussion. I want you to be in there disrupting, saying we've got a number of different ways. You think about how people learn. Some people learn by doing, by seeing, and by reading. If you can appeal to different learning styles, you can appeal to different consumer styles. So I like getting things digitally online. Other people like the personal touch. You need to be able to address both. Personalization will be key. The whole Netflix model is that they know what you've been watching. And so if you can harness that data and you can provide better personalization, you'll actually be ahead of the disruption curve. There's one group of people you really need to be worried about. Millennials. Now, you might think, oh, these millennials, they're young things, they don't know much about anything. Millennials range from about 22 years of age to about 32 years of age at the moment. So at the upper end, they're married with 2 kids, and they're on their 3rd or 4th job in their career, and they're probably a mid to senior level manager who are making decisions about your products. They want to have things online. They're comfortable getting advice from automated systems, and they'll tell their friends if they like something. And these next-gen investors are harder to win. And if they start off using an online system and they like it, they'll stick with it, and you won't get a look in. So if you can actually appeal to these people, it's said that in 5 years' time, 50% of the workforce will be millennials. They do think in a different way. They've grown up with the always-on culture, always being connected, and they talk to each other. So it is a real worry, but you can harness that talent. So who's doing it? Who's actually disrupting? I've got a few examples here that I really like. One is from a US firm called Oscar. They provide insurance. And when you basically go on the website to get a quote, it asks you normal questions. It doesn't ask you to fill out 200 pieces of paper. It says, where's my zip code? I'd like to cover. And you can imagine online this would all be dynamic. And I've even seen airlines check you in online this way. This appeals to me because it's really simple. It works on a mobile phone, it works on my tablet, it works on my desktop, and it makes my life a lot easier. So on that Monday morning staff meeting, think about how you can start simplifying some of your digital touch points to be really, really easy. Now I came across this company called Trove. They've just launched in Australia, and they again appeal to the millennial market because they provide real-time insurance. Let's have a quick look at a video.
I'm leaving my house now. And as I step outside, all of these things with me are fully insured against loss or damage, instantly. That trick I just showed you, that's Trove. Trove is smart insurance. Unlike blanket policies that cover everything at once, Trove helps me protect just the things I care about. So if I want to protect my skis for the weekend, I can do that.
Can I?
Yep. And if I want to protect my bike for the afternoon, I can do that too. All I have to do is swipe to protect. My Trove is an on-demand inventory of everything I own, and adding to it is super easy. Found it. Trove provides protection against damage, loss, and theft. So, if anything happens, just about anything you can imagine, I know my camera's covered. Trove makes it easy to file a claim and get paid right away. I just answer these questions, and Trove handles the rest. Now this doesn't feel quite so bad. And every time I leave my house, things like my laptop and phone are protected.
Back in one piece this time.
Nice work. Trove puts me in control of the things I care about, and that's really smart.
Trove puts me in control. So this is the millennial mindset. They want to do it themselves. They want to cover everything. They want to have the inventory of all their assets. So that's for personal insurance. And I'm sure you could segue into how that would work for each of your different companies that are represented. You might go, Andrew, that can never happen because it's so complicated. Consumers don't want complicated. They want simple. You're going to be disrupted by people that make it simple. I couldn't be clearer than that. Now I want to talk for a moment about cognitive. Now cognitive is about the art of learning. And I know we've been talking about robo-advisors. Cognitive is not a robot. Cognitive is a device that learns, that actually works with humans to provide better answers. You have to train cognitive computers. And they're great at managing unstructured data. So weather, stock prices, tweets, all those sorts of things they can measure and manage. And so programmable computers actually can't work with unstructured data, so we need to move to cognitive. And cognitive computers actually learn from their mistakes, so you train them. So imagine getting your best fund advisor, someone who's been doing the business for years and knows everything, and have them starting ingesting their knowledge into a cognitive platform that learns and gets smarter and smarter. And every single day, the cognitive platform actually learns about how to do that. Now, one example of cognitive is actually IBM Watson. Of course, I work for IBM, but it is probably the world's best example of that. And I want to take you back to a time when we actually developed Watson, and this is really interesting. Those of you may have heard of Jeopardy program, and back in 2011, when we actually put Watson against the 2 best Jeopardy players ever, and he won. Now, the interesting story behind this is that a year out, we had to commit to the producers we're going to do this. And in 2010, Watson couldn't win a Jeopardy show. He had to be taught general knowledge. He had to be taught the way to think, because Jeopardy, basically, you're given the answer and you have to provide the question. And you have to deal with slang and nuances and those sorts of things. So it's actually not a really easy thing to program a computer to do. Let's look at what happened back in 2011 just quickly.
This is Jeopardy, the IBM challenge.
Let's go to legal ease for 1200.
This person is appointed by a testator to carry out the directions and requests in his will. Watson.
What is executor?
Right.
Same category, 1600.
Answer A double.
That was the moment when I knew it's over.
Our three players have made their wagers. The category is 19th century novelists, and here is the clue. William Wilkinson's An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia inspired this author's most famous novel.
What Watson wants to do then is preserve the lead, not take a big risk, especially with Final Jeopardy, because just like for humans, Final Jeopardy is hard for Watson.
You came up with what? Who is Bram Stoker? You are correct. Over to Ken Jennings now. And we find, who is Stoker? I, for one, welcome our new computer overlord. Now we come to Watson. Who is Bram Stoker? And the wager? Hello, 17,973, and a two-day total of 77,147.
So you can see there, some of the questions that Watson had to answer are pretty, I didn't know the answer to that one. And you also would have seen at the bottom, there were a bar there, and Watson was basically telling you the confidence level. Here are my three answers, and here's the confidence level. Now let me look at another use case for Watson. I was told about a boy called Kevin who presented to a hospital in the US with very stingy eyes, and no one could quite work out what was wrong with him. And after the 6th day in hospital, by fluke, a nurse looked at him, and the fact that he still had stingy eyes after the 6th day, and said, that could be Kawasaki's disease, I'd heard about this. Now what we did is we actually put Watson to the task and said, well, how would Watson handle that? So we ingested all the knowledge about pediatrics in there, all the different case history and everything else. And what Watson then did is provided a device in 2 hours that it could be Kawasaki disease. And he did that by eliminating things and all sorts of things. So by cognitive, we reduced the treatment time from 6 days down to 2 hours. Now think about how that could work in your industry. By training Watson on how to think, given all the different variables, what are the different use cases, what are the different investment scenarios. Watson isn't going to take your job away. Watson's going to give you the 3 possible answers. He's also going to give you how he got those answers, so you can understand whether his answers are correct. And if it's the best way, you go, yes, Watson, that's correct, and he learns for next time, that's the right way to do it. So cognitive is an area that can actually really help your business, and IBM and others are leading the way in doing that. So what can you do? Hopefully by now you've admitted that yes, we are going to be disrupted. We need to worry about this. Monday morning is going to be a very difficult meeting now because we're going to scrap everything else we're going to talk about. Forget Brexit.